So as you guys might know, over the past couple of months, we've been hosting these video sessions where we invite sales and marketing leaders to jump on video with people who are looking for jobs in sales and marketing. And we help them apply best practices that work in sales or marketing to their job hunt. Alexine just most recently got hired in July, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
In the midst of all this crazy stuff going on, somehow, and we'll kind of dive into that story a little bit, she was able to land an account executive role at Displayer, which is super awesome. And she's also a very active member of the community, someone that we've been following for quite some time now. So really excited to hear your story. Paul, would love to just also kind of hear from you, I guess, to kick us off. Like, what are some of the challenges that you're facing now? I know that you are looking for a job in sales. Maybe bring us up to speed, and then I'll kind of let Alexine take the lead, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. I don't know how much you want me to elaborate on it, but I got laid off shortly after COVID started, during lockdown, everything. I was working as an account manager, and a lot of my clients were hotels, so not a lot of money coming in from that now. So I've been looking for a job since May now. Like I said, I was an account manager, and so just trying to find any different ways that I can to kind of break through the noise. I think one of the issues that I'm running into is every job that I'm applying for, because on LinkedIn you can see how many people have already applied for these jobs. Every time a good job opens up, within 24 hours there are 100 applicants. So it's really tough to kind of break through that noise and make yourself heard. And it's tough to really put your all into so many of these applications that may or may not go anywhere. So that's where I am.
Yeah. And it's like, I was there too, where, I accepted an offer and I was still with my company. But at the same time, when I was looking at these roles, I kept seeing that too. And it was like 200. There was like one I looked at that had like 400 applicants. And then I got like a phone screen and I almost canceled it because I was like, what am I even doing here? So like, I've definitely been in that headspace where you see this number. What I will say about that number, if it brings you any comfort, for Displayer, they had one job open and there were 243 applicants. And then they were actually seeking an account executive with market research experience, which I do not have. So if that comforts you on any level, but I will say that number is super intimidating, and I would take it with a grain of salt too, because what I learned later on is that there is a subset of those candidates that are just kind of like applying to anything, regardless of their background or what they specialize in or what they're even frankly interested in. So there is like part of that number that's a little mushy, that's not maybe real, but I think it's a troubling stat to see in front of you every time you go on LinkedIn. Like, it was very difficult for me to see that every time. And I definitely had that in the back of my mind. So I know it's hard to do, but I would try to like take yourself away from that number a little bit as much as you can, even though it's really difficult, because that just gets into your head and like puts you in the wrong headspace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So maybe you can take me through like where you're getting to with some of the interviews that you've been doing. Like, do you feel like you're getting like later stages in the interview? Do you feel like...
Yeah, I feel like the majority of the time when I do get an interview with a company, or start with a phone screen, I will at least get two or more interviews beyond that,
okay.
Which is also frustrating because, you spend 2 months and 8 interviews. Like, literally found out I didn't get a job yesterday after 8 interviews over the course of 2 months. So when I am getting the phone screen, I'm typically getting further down the process. But of course, that's, 1 in 10 jobs that I'm applying for, probably.
Yeah, well, that's a good sign. I mean, the fact that you are making it, because I think usually we identify more of a problem if it's like you're not getting past phone screens, like there's something, like maybe there's an issue with the type of roles that you're applying to. So clearly the type of roles that you're applying to makes sense if you're making it that far in. And I think the thing with the job market right now that's like, it's interesting. I said this yesterday when I was recording a podcast. I feel like the market is kind of getting even with us in a way. Like, I don't know if you remember this, but like the last 2 years, it was like a free for all. If you were a candidate, you could ask for any amount of money. You could do whatever you wanted. Like, I got really cocky when I was interviewing and just like made up, like it was just crazy. And the market flipped on its head overnight. And so the companies do have more control, unfortunately. So I think what's happening, and what I noticed when I was interviewing, and the bulk of my interviews were more so like May, June timeframe, is what I would probably say. Like mostly June was like a heavy hitting month for me in terms of like April, May. So definitely as we got closer into May and June, that's when I felt like conversations were starting to happen where there were actual roles, because definitely like earlier, like March timeframe, there just weren't even roles open. So you were kind of having these conversations. They were kind of loosey-goosey. But what I was seeing is that companies are still hiring. What's different is that where they would have hired like 4 to 5 account executives like myself, for instance, and put us together in a class, now they're hiring 1 to 2. Same thing for account managers, for SDRs. Like they're doing kind of smaller increments of people, but they're still hiring. So there's good and bad there, which is that it's more competitive, obviously. But the good is that most of the companies that I saw do like hiring freezes, they're all unfrozen now. So that's a good sign, and that's very optimistic. But yeah, it's definitely it was a very different ball game, interviewing this time around than it was, a year ago even. So
yeah, and I can say I used to have to ignore LinkedIn messages from recruiters, like 2 to 3 per month. I beg for that time again. That would be amazing.
Yeah. That's where I say, like, I do feel like on an unfortunate sense, like I was the exact same way. Like I didn't want to talk to anyone. I would like laugh people off if they reached out to me, or like even when I saw certain company names, I was like, no. But yeah, it's a lot harder to get time. What worked really well for me is I approach everything, and I can go into, if it's helpful, I can go into my strategy, but it gets like really nerdy really fast. So I'm like a very organized. I approach everything like a sale. Like everything in life to me is a sale. Like if I order a piece of furniture, it's like a sale. Like I'm trying to figure out like where I can discount and do. So that's like my whole life. So with interviewing, the way I approach it is before I even like start talking to companies, what I did was I made a target list, and it was like, initially like 100 companies. Then I filtered it down to 50. Then I made my top 20. And then I basically made my own like CRM system, which I was telling someone else about this recently, and I don't like the way that I did it. I would have done it in Excel or through another organization method if I could. I did it through the notes section on my phone, and it was a like 20-page note by the end of my process. So I did basically a list, and I broke it down by stage. So like ones that I had reached out to, but I hadn't heard back from. Ones that I had reached out to where I was waiting for a response, or they made a connection point for me, but I'm waiting for the recruiter, someone to reach out to me. Ones where I've scheduled meetings, ones where I'm in the interview process, ones that were no's, I put those at the bottom so I didn't have to see them as often. And then ones where I was awaiting offers, things like that at the top. So like I had it broken down like that. But that was super helpful, because what I noticed was once I started to talk to companies, it got a little confusing at times of who I'd reached out to and done different things. So I think like an organization system helps a lot. But once I had that top 20, I went through and my first pass was me trying to go through my network. So like whoever I know at those companies, mainly like leadership. And one of the interesting things I did too is I attended, like we have a sales assembly here based in Chicago, and there's a lot of sales leaders that either speak for those events or attend those events. So I kind of attended a lot of those over, a month to 2 period. And then I paid attention to either who was on those events or who was speaking. And so I actually got some meetings that way too, where I followed along. And you could do the same thing with any, person on the revenue side of the house. Like if you look through their LinkedIn feed and they have like an event coming up, it was a really quick way to get in the door, because I could say like, here's 3 takeaways I had from your event. I don't know if you'd be open to it, but I'd like to set up a conversation just to get to know you a little bit better, hear more about your story. And then you can either add in there that you are looking, or kind of softly add that in at the end of the conversation, and just try to make like a really good impact when you do get that call. So I did that, where I actually reached out to several like VPs of sales or chief revenue officers. And some of them I did lead with the fact that I was job searching. Some of them I didn't. And we got to the end of the conversation, and it was like super engaging, and we got along well. And then I just kind of like nestled it in at the end of the conversation, like, hey, by the way, like I'm kind of quietly having conversations outside of my role. I just wanted to throw that in there. I don't know if you're comfortable making an introduction for me, and I don't want that to be the purpose of this conversation necessarily, but I thought based on our conversation and how much I really felt like we, hit it off here, maybe it's worthwhile. So that 20, I went through and tried to go through either my personal means or people that I actually know at those companies. And then from there, I started to either, like, one trick that I did, which people had mixed opinions on this, but I actually would reach out sometimes to either, like, if I knew no one at the company, like salespeople or someone in marketing even, and just a lot of them offer referral bonuses. So I would reach out to them and say, like, here's a blurb on me. And I had like a templated paragraph that I could just copy paste in any message. And then I would customize the top and bottom of my message. But I would say, hey, I don't know if your company offers a referral incentive. If so, it's a company that I'm interested in for XYZ reason. Here's a little blurb on me. If you're comfortable, I can send my resume. And that way you can submit it through your ATS system, and got good responses that way too. Cause that way it's like more of a win-win. And then another channel that I used that was like a little outside of the box was I went through some board members. So there was a couple companies where I really didn't know anyone. So I actually reached out through the board member. And what happened was, even though that board member didn't know me, they would forward my resume, for instance, to their sales leadership team. And automatically I become like a higher stakes candidate, even though that board member has never met me before. So kind of try to think creatively too, like, who can I reach out to, and think outside of just like the normal, like, sales leader and this and that, like, try to think outside the box a little bit too. But the board member one was surprisingly successful.
I have not heard that before. I love that.
Yeah,
really...
It was weird. Yeah, I didn't expect them to like just be like, yeah, cool, send me your resume, I'll submit it. And I was like, really? Okay. But yeah, it's just like all about getting creative right now, because it's, to your point, like, it's super noisy right now. And I think it's just hard for companies to sort through this information too right now. Like, they're just getting inundated. So it's all about kind of making yourself stand out. And some of the companies I talked to as well, just so you know this on the back end, I spoke to, and they said they're only talking to employee referrals right now. Mm-hmm. So they actually weren't even looking at any candidates that came from outside. And that was just one like prominent tech company. But that's something, that's another reason to try to find an avenue in with some of these companies too, in case they're also doing that same practice.
But like, they still had those jobs posted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, sometimes, like, and like, I mean, towards the beginning, I don't know if it's happening as much because people did call them out for this, but like, a lot of companies were just like hoarding, quote unquote, candidates and just like getting applications, but not really hiring immediately, just to wait out what happened with the whole COVID thing. But the other thing I love about the board member strategy is, like, if you think about it, and I have a couple other questions for you too, Alexine, as you're talking, because these are great tips. The thing is, like, they're not as involved in the day-to-day pain as the hiring manager or the recruiter or even like the CEO, right? So for them, it's not like they're getting your message and thinking like, oh, another candidate, right? Or like, oh, you know, I need to focus on this, and this today, like, just, you know, whatever meeting I have coming up. Like, the board members, a lot of times, like, they're a little bit removed. They're like a step removed. So for them, it's like, yeah, I mean, this is my duty as a board member to bring this forward and let them figure out the details of how to handle it. But when it comes from the board member, and all of a sudden the CEO and whoever the senior leadership is like, all right, like, we have to at least, you know, seriously take a look at this, or grant the interview, especially, you know, just the, you know, tenacity or whatever you want to call it of the person actually reaching out to the board to get in. It's like, I need to figure out who this person is. And, you know, there's not as much risk involved for them.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I think too, if you haven't created like that paragraph for yourself yet, and mine is like, you can go actually to my LinkedIn profile. If you go to my About Me section, there's like the middle of it is basically the paragraph I used. But it was like super heavy. Like, here are the awards I've won. Here's the success metrics I've had. Here's some of my, like, the end of it was kind of like, I'm passionate about diversity and inclusion and whatever. So it kind of like tied all of my background together, like success wise, culture wise, everything. But that's something, you know, it may take you like an hour or two, but just like really tighten up like 3 or 4 sentences, like make them like really heavy hitting, so that if you send that, then like whoever reads it, they'll just be like, oh yeah, like, awesome, Paul, like, looks like a rock star candidate.
Yeah. I mean, look, oh, go ahead.
Keeping track of the companies that you're really interested in, because I can tell you, I have already lost track of, you know, which companies I've talked to, who I talked to at that company, if I'm waiting to hear back from somebody. So having that spreadsheet is something I hadn't thought about, but seems like something I should have thought about already.
Yeah. I mean, same. That's the only reason that And I did not organize it well, by the way. Like when I looked, I found like a lot of duplicate entries and I was like, oh shit. Like I emailed 2 people at this company and now I'm like dealing with 2 points of contact. And that's where it gets like a little iffy because then they're both trying to like schedule times for me and I look bad. So it's more about just like protecting your brand too. But my 2 cents on the black hole of like applying for applications, I would just try to go through someone first because like as soon as you apply for a company, I don't know if this is true, but you're in their ATS. So they'll see that they like, it'll have a status that says like candidate rejected. So it's like, that's going to always be the first status that you have with that company. And I've done it too. So I'm sure that's the status I've had with companies before too. But I've seen the inside of these ATS systems. So I know that it says that. And so that's why I would try to just go through a different channel first. That way they're not just like blanket declining you because of whatever arbitrary reason right now, because they have so many candidates. Because the reasons for getting declined now for interviews are like all over the place. And I'll give an example. I had this company's reached out to me 7 times now since they first reached out. I've told them 3 times plus that I'm accepted an offer. So they reached out to me initially and it was perfect timing because I was actually looking for an enterprise AE role and they were looking for 3 to 5 years of experience. I have 7 and they were looking for someone that's done President's Club, all this stuff. I've done that. So I was like, oh, this is a layup. I didn't even get a phone screen. And the reason was they said that they had candidates that had 15 years of sales experience. And I pushed back on the recruiter. I was like, A, you guys reached out to me. B, it says 3 to 5 years on this rec and I have 7. And they were like, yeah, but we want to take advantage of the people with 15 years on the market. And I don't like that phrase, take advantage. Like I felt like that was a nasty phrase for just recruiting in general. But it was just funny to me. And now they've reached out 6 more times since then. Like, we think you'd be a perfect candidate. I'm like, I probably would have been. So It's just interesting. So the reasons people are getting cut right now may not even make sense. Like that one doesn't make sense because I was above the years of required experience. And, what I said to them too, I was like, I would be weary of a candidate with 15 years of sales experience, I guess, that's accepting the same base as me. Nice talking to you. So it's like one of those too. I loved it. But it's just something to think about too. Like if you are getting these rejections, keep in mind, like some of them right now are just all over the place. Like these are not normal rejections that we would have faced like a year or 2 ago.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting what you said about like the market correction too. And it happened like so quickly. I don't want to say it's payback, but like you said, like it was a candidate's market and like there were so many solutions and technologies that were like geared towards like sourcing, right? And like employer brand and like making sure that you're top of mind with really great candidates in the market. And then all of a sudden overnight, it was like, now the employer is like the hot nightclub that everybody wants to get into, right? And not the other way around. And then it's like, well, and then it's just like, boom. And then it's hard hitting and they're looking for any reason to say no. To be fair, like they are overwhelmed, right? And like you said, like out of those 250 or 300 applicants, like how many of them are actually qualified, actually took a second to figure out if they're qualified before just hitting apply. And then, how many referrals are they getting, right? So like when we first started doing this, like intros were working pretty well, but then all of a sudden it was like everybody was getting intros. And it was like, everybody was like, hey, check out this person. They are amazing because of this and this and this. And then it became noisy on that front. So then, how do you go above and beyond? And Alexine, it seems like, and here, like, I'll just pull up for 1 sec. Not to kind of
no, please
on the spot, but like even just looking at your about section, because you brought it up before, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, you're talking about some of your kind of what's driving you, like where it began. You can kind of like it's very like image, like you can imagine it, right? Like it's very visual in a way. Like you can imagine like selling door to door, which is obviously really hard to do. And then this paragraph, like President's Club, that's something that stands out. Kind of consistency in terms of like quarterly, you mentioned it actually here too. And then the fact that you're doing other things on top just shows like the well-roundedness, right? So for example, like being a teacher, and these are like qualities that people look for, and especially in account executives and account managers, because it is a growth oriented role. You want to be able to have someone that's able to like teach and reteach and reframe and coach, right? Because that's really what buyers want. So, aspireship, like training, and then obviously founding initiatives. And then one thing that stood out to me, like looking at these expertise, like it's pretty specific, and like it's not just like a whole bunch of keywords thrown in there, right? Like, and just this one by itself just tells me that like you're not only prospecting, which anybody can do, but like there's an intention behind it, and there's like certain methodologies that you're probably grabbing from like some of the top salespeople, right? Or sales voices or whatever, that just goes above and beyond. And then I love this like kind of thrown in there where it's like, that's where the curiosity kicks in, where it's like, I want to learn more about that. Like, and that discipline that it takes to be, at the top of any sort of like practice, just makes you like want to reach out to that person. So I would definitely like suggest some of that in your profile, Paul, where you can touch on some of the things that drive you outside of what you're necessarily doing on a day-to-day basis in your roles.
Yeah. And definitely like, I know it's weird to throw in, like, it is awkward to like throw in all these metrics and like, I was this, I did this, I surpassed quota, but like, this is the time to do it, is like that paragraph. Like I wouldn't like the wordiness, like they need to see like, I won this award, I did this. Like you have to be super selfish with this paragraph and like how you present yourself. And the one other thing that I didn't touch on that helped me a lot in my search, which if you actually go through my LinkedIn posts, like 8 or 9 posts back, I did a post just about interviewing during a pandemic. So you can like read through that, and it has these strategies. And I actually put a template of one of the messages I sent to a board member that I got a meeting out of. So that's like in the comments section. But one of the things I did too was if I didn't know someone, I would send like video messages sometimes. And then all of my thank you notes, most of my thank you notes that I did as video messages rather than written thank yous. And I feel like because even though you're on the account manager side of the house, like you're still revenue focused, obviously. So I think it shows like a different type of tenacity and like, this person's gutsy. Like even if the video is so new right now. So none of mine were like really crisp and like concise or like, well, edited and all this stuff. It was just really me just saying like, here are the 3 key takeaways from our conversation. And then I did like hard closes at the end. I'm really looking forward to moving forward with the process, and I'm excited to meet more members of your team. Thank you so much. But that helped a lot. And I got a lot of really good feedback about like chief revenue officers, especially, like loved that. They would message me back. They were like, this is so cool. Thanks for the video. That was fun. I haven't had people do that. So you kind of have to think like that too. And even voice messages would be a step up from just these typical like written message. I mean, no thank you note is the worst, obviously, but then you have like written thank you note. And then I even think voice messages would be cool too, especially if you have like more that you want to say, as long as you could consolidate it into 60 seconds. If you wanted to write it all out and then do it via voice, I think that's an option too. But the video message piece, that really helped me stand out a lot in these interviews too.
Do you find yourself doing some of that, Paul? Or what do you think about that so far?
I haven't done any video interviews yet, or video thank you notes. I do always do a thank you note. My rule is within 24 hours. So I usually try and aim for less than that. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting concept. I haven't heard of anyone doing it, so definitely stand out, certainly.
Yeah, it's starting to pick up like a little, I've probably talked about it at a bunch of events, and I know people are starting to, like, I wasn't the first person to do it, but I know people are starting to do it more. Morgan Ingram's a really good person to follow. He does a lot of video content. And even though it's not focused on interviewing, I just like watching how he talks to people and like the ease that he has in conversation. And mine were not that level of comfort, by the way. But like you seem to have a very strong like video presence, and you seem like your voice, your tonality is really good. So I feel like for you, that would be a cool avenue to try too, and just see how it works. Because again, all you have to do is like, thank you for the time. Here's a couple quick takeaways I had from our conversation. You can have them written down and have like a cheat sheet, and then just a close for the next step. And I feel like that might help your success rates a little bit too.
Yeah, I can send some templates that we've been using for like video thank yous. And one thing that I also notice about Alexine, and I keep kind of putting on the spot, but hey, we're celebrating here. You're constantly in these conversations, right? Like Rev Genius, like you're in the conversation. You're hosting your own podcasts and shows. You know, you're joining Morgan's Muffins with Morgan every Saturday. You know, you're jumping in and kind of taking all of this information in. And you're not like, I mean, obviously some of it is you're putting your own unique spin on it, but we're not like creating these brand new concepts, right? Like we are just learning from people that have tested, that have proven certain things work, certain things don't work. And then you just take that and apply your own unique spin to it. And it's no different in a job search, right? So just that like constant learning is like so important. Like putting yourself in a situation to take in that information and then apply it.
Yeah. I was going to say, I like the video piece too, because I feel like not only are you kind of like making your, like nobody's comfortable on video yet, really, if we're being honest. So you're putting yourself in a, you know, kind of uncomfortable, but it's also showing like, I'm willing to try new tactics. And like, I'm not afraid to, like, people like to hire people that they think are coachable. So I think that shows, it's kind of like pre-creating rapport. Like this is someone that will be coachable, that's willing to kind of think outside of the box and try something new that hasn't been done before. And I think like leadership really takes to that, because that's one of those things that if people aren't coachable, you can't really fix that. There's only so much you can do. So definitely that aspect too.
Question for you, Alexine. So obviously you have been an account executive and you've, you know, been in sales, and it seems like it's something that you're just kind of like passionate about, and you probably don't even think about it as sales, right? And then when you jumped into your job search, you sort of like did you naturally just start thinking like, hey, you know, it's a sales cycle, so I'm just going to apply the same things I applied before? Or was there something that like sparked, or like, how did you just start doing that?
Yeah, I think for me, it was such a weird time, because I started to kind of loosely have conversations like all the way back in March. I knew that I wanted to work in a different environment than I was in. I wanted to find something that was faster paced, that was more hunting focused. And I think COVID just gave me like a moment of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, like come to Jesus moment, where I was like, okay, I don't know. This is like, this big thing is happening. There's so many like world movements happening at once. And like, am I truly doing what I want to be doing? And if not, like, how do I fix that? So, you know, I started to have very like high level conversations way back. But I think that what happened was, and I don't know if it clicked like in late April or probably May timeframe is when it like really clicked for me. It just got like kind of exciting again. It was scary because it was a different playing field than I'd ever been on. Like it wasn't the same environment that I'd interviewed in before, but it got kind of exciting to me because it kind of felt like I was trying to close an enterprise deal. Like I was going after it and I had to be strategic and I had to like cast a wide net. And there was like one company, for instance, that I talked to, like I got in through their like CRO, then he introduced me to their like senior VP of sales, who introduced me to their VP of sales, who introduced me to their like sales director, then sales manager. And then my like sixth conversation was the recruiter. So it was like such a weird backwards like experience. And the recruiter's like, tell me about yourself. And then like look through the notes and she was like, oh my God, you've met my entire leadership team. And I was like, yeah. So, and she's like, I'm just going to schedule. Like, she's like, I'm going to go. But I feel like for me, it got, like I tried to, and I know this is hard to do because it's not like an easy time to get in that headspace either. So I fully own that. But for me, I kind of approached it as like something fun to take on. And I think initially when I was having conversations, I felt like I was maybe operating for more of like a desperation. Like I wanted to change atmospheres and I felt like a little bit more on edge and desperate. And then when I kind of took a moment to like breathe and like ease into conversations, I started getting a little bit choosier about the companies. Like initially I was kind of taking calls with any recruiter and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't want to work for these companies and I would never interview for these companies normally. So I started to just like get a little bit more realistic with what I was actually looking for. But yeah, I feel like I approached it like an enterprise sale. And then what happened was once I calmed down a little bit, which again, it's hard to do. Like there's a pandemic going on. There's a lot happening right now. But once I kind of took a step back and thought about it, I was like, I'm going to find a job. Like it's going to happen and I need to like just chill out a little bit and like let the process happen how it's going to, because it reminded me a lot of like when you go on a Tinder date with someone and it's like, do you want to marry me? Like, are you ready to get married right now? And they're like, oh my God, no. And they run for their life. Like that's what I felt like initially. I was kind of giving off that. And so I think some of it's like psychological. And I think like Paul, it seems like you've had like a successful career. Like it seems like you've done well. like you are going to find a job like 100%. This is not the last company you will have ever worked for. And I know it's like hard when you're in the thick of it and it feels like, oh my God, I'm never going to find a job again, or like, this is so hard, but like you will. And it tends to happen really quickly too, where like all of a sudden you like feel like you're up against a wall. And then all of a sudden I had like multiple offers come simultaneously. And then I was in final rounds with a bunch of other companies. I had to like cancel all those because I already had offers. But that's what it's been like for other people, like in Rev Genius. I've talked to a number of people and I'll talk to them like a week earlier and they're like, everything sucks and this is the worst. And then I'll talk to them like the next week and they're like, I have 3 offers. Can you help me talk through like how I negotiate these offers? And I'm like, yes, like hell yes. So I think just remembering, like taking a step back, and though this is like a weird time, like you will be hired again 100%. So still try to like stay true to what you actually want to, because the worst case scenario is you pick a company that you wouldn't have picked like a year or 2 ago, and then you get there and it's horrible. And if you would have waited another month or so, you could have picked something that you really like, you know, that you really like. So I think that for me was like in the back of my mind too, is like, if I pick a company that I hate and I'm stuck there for another year or 2, like that's worst case scenario. It's not finding a job. So just keep that in mind too, and try to get like, in that post, I think that you just sent out, there's a link, and Amy Volas put together this scorecard template, and she talks about it all the time. If you ever go to Thursday night sales, and I hear it like ringing in my ear at all times, but she's like, scorecard. So there's a scorecard that you can do that kind of helps you get honest about like what you're actually looking for. And what I realized is, you know, before when I chose, you know, a previous position, I deprioritized leadership and prioritized money first. And then second was like culture. Third was like leadership was like 3rd or 4th on the list. It wasn't even like really important. What I learned was that was more important than I thought it would be. And so this time around, leadership was number 1 on my list. And then I filtered back, and money was actually number 3. And although I still am actually going to make more money, so it's ironic, but I deprioritized it because whenever you focus on just money, I feel like you lose sight of what actually matters. Like you get really jaded really quickly, or at least I do. So I think that scorecard would be a really good exercise for you too, which I went through. And just to get honest about what you're actually looking for, because then what happens is once you identify your top 3 things, in every interview, they either ask you those, or you can just proactively bring it up and say, you know, for me with this job search, the number 1 thing I want to find is a really strong leadership team. Here's how I define that. And do you feel like you guys have that? And that kind of turns the tables a little bit. And they're like, oh, she knows what she's looking for. Like maybe we aren't a fit. And so now we have to impress her, you know, or like, so it kind of like changes the dynamic a little bit, but that's a really good exercise. That's helpful too.
There's a lot like dating. And the fact that you're writing it down too, right? Like just seeing it visually. And that's why the scorecard, another reason why the scorecard is so great is because you actually write it down, right? It's not just like thoughts in your head.
There's one other resource too. I actually have, this is my, I always forget about it, but it's still sitting on my desk, but this is like my notebook of all my notes. So I have almost 2 full notebooks now of just my interview notes from this. So I'm like pretty diligent about note taking too, mostly because I forget stuff all the time and it gets confusing with like numbers. So I like to know like pay numbers up front. That way, if in like interview 3, all of a sudden the pay is like $10,000 less, I'm like, oh, weird. Cause in this conversation, I was told the base range is this. So I like to just keep it for myself. But one thing I did for this search, which was new, is I made kind of a interview cheat sheet, if you will. And so basically I had 3 sections in it. The top section was background on my interviewer. And I did this regardless if it was a recruiter, if it was a chief revenue officer, it doesn't matter who it was, even if it was someone like an HR person. Like I just did it just in case I needed it, because you never know when someone will be like, oh, like, did you have a chance to look into my background? And you don't know who's going to ask what questions. So I did that. And I basically put together like history with the company. Maybe I creeped on their LinkedIn activity to see like what they interact with a lot or what they're interested in, college or university they attended. If there's anything in their groups that we both have in common. Like one person I interviewed with was like an avid gardener, and I garden a lot. So that was like a weird segue for us. So that's the first section, is just a bio on whoever you're interviewing with. The second section I do basically as a quick elevator pitch for the company, because they always, so this question comes up a lot where they'll be like, oh, are you familiar with our company, or would you like me to just give you a rundown of what it is that we do? I'm happy to do so. And I don't know if that's a trick question, but I have like a theory that it is, and they want to see if you'll like proactively answer. I don't know if I like made that up, but I have this like underlying theory that that's what it is. So I would actually like proactively answer that and say, you know what, like, here's my understanding of your company, but what would be helpful is if you filled in the blanks from there. And regardless of how, you know, obviously you have to be on the right track, but even if it wasn't perfect, like the fact that you're answering that question proactively, I think spoke volumes for them. And that's like a pattern interrupt where they're not expecting you to respond that way. So I would put together like a quick, you know, 3 lines, like first one's like what the company does in a way that I can like convey it, because there's some of these companies, it's too complicated. Like, you know, I'm only interviewing for tech companies, and sometimes you get into it and they're like, we're a complex platform that aggregates data and does this and that, and I can't repeat that easily. So I would try to break it down to where it's like 1 or 2 lines, and I can actually restate this where I'm not getting confused. And then sometimes too, if they have like notable clients, like I would include that and be like, I know you guys work with, you know, Uber and Facebook today, so those are obviously, you know, great brands to have under your belt. I've worked a lot of the, you know, these fortunate, you know, whatever, 1,000 companies. So I'm really interested in continuing to do some of that work too. So I was excited to see that when I was researching you. So just like little tidbits on the company that you can easily rattle off and like peek down on a piece of paper at during these virtual interviews right now. And then the last section was questions that are specific to the interviewer. So if it was, for instance, someone in HR, I was asking more questions about like culture and like what do you feel like the team breakdown is? Like, how do teams interact with one another? Like definitely like fluffier culture-based questions. I would ask about employee resource groups and like what kind of resources exist there. And then as I got over to, for instance, if I was interviewing with a sales manager, I would ask more about like KPIs and what are your expectations on activity levels, and what does success look like for one of your top reps? When it was reps I was interviewing with, I was asking like day-to-day questions, like what does a day in life look like? What are some of the common objections that you hear from clients? What are, you know, some of the reasons that deals go dark for you? And that's like for you, honestly, just to know what you're up against, because they're going to be the most honest. Like they have nothing to lose in scaring you off, especially if you're a good salesperson. And then chief revenue officers and like VPs, I would ask more like vision-based questions, like where do you see the sales org going? What do you think the future looks like for this team? So definitely like a little bit more forward thinking there, and just kind of rising above some of those day-to-day KPIs. So that's like a quick cheat sheet that I outlined in that post too, but that helped me a ton just to be able to have something to reference, because I think with the virtual interviews, it's like easy to pull up the company website and then have your resume up and then have like all these other resources. But then when someone's asking you a question, like you can't be like, oh, can I have 30 seconds, please? I'm just going to like review that on your website just quickly here. And so I think that's just a cool way to kind of keep yourself organized and just help you out. And then also I keep those all in the same section of the notebook together. So that way, you know, say the company is Displayer, I'll have like 6 pages of Displayer, and I can flip back between those and reference things from each of those conversations too, to kind of tie it all together.
Love that. That's awesome. I have a question, but Paul, I'd love if you had questions.
Not a ton of questions right now. I'm actually taking copious notes on this call.
Okay, good.
Specifically, I liked your ideas of, I do try and target my questions to different people differently. Like I have stopped asking the HR people what their average contract value is, because they are never going to know that, or what their sales cycle is.
Yeah.
It is interesting. What would you consider, because I have an interview this afternoon with a rep for a company I'm interviewing with. What are some of the other questions you would ask a rep that you're interviewing with?
I think I would, here's my thing on reps. Like, I don't know that like what their involvement is in the decision-making process of you moving forward as a candidate. So like, I try to obviously be like cordial with those people. My main purpose in talking to reps is for me to understand like what I'm walking into. So some of those conversations are a little selfish. I always try to like start by, fluffing their feathers a little and saying like, hey, your leader told me you're a really strong performer. So that's why they have you as part of the interview process. So I'm really excited to hear about your experience, about your day-to-day. Obviously, if you have an agenda for this, I'm happy to walk through that, or anything you specifically want to share. And then otherwise, I have a number of questions that I wanted to ask you. And then, so like, give them the chance if they do have some kind of agenda. But again, I feel like the purpose of that is for you to get to know the job. So then from there, I'm usually asking questions about the deal cycle. Like how long, like, I think it's fair to ask questions like, how long is your average deal cycle? I know, and I'll say this, I'll say like, I know they mentioned to me it's 6 months. Do you think that's accurate? Or do you feel like it's usually bleeds into like 8 to 10? Or do you feel like it's shorter? Is it just, kind of all over the place? And then like, let them answer that. And then I'll go into the objection piece. I think is really helpful. Like, what are you commonly hearing? Like if people aren't saying yes, or from like the account manager side, if you're not seeing like upsells, what do you think the main reason is? Like, is there a reason that companies like wouldn't want to repurchase us for another 3 years? Or what are some of the reasons that happens? If you have clients that are churn, like you could ask about like, what are indicators of churn risk for you? Like, are there ways that you can look at customer health scores? How would you determine if a client is in the red and you really need to make sure they're good? And then even from there, I would say too, if you do identify that there's a poor client health score, then from there, what do you do with that information? Like, do you then set up a call right away? Or like, what's your process for mitigating a potential churn risk client? So I think I would ask more questions around that. And then maybe questions around like team dynamic, and definitely questions about the manager. Like, hey, I've talked to the VP of sales, I've talked to your sales manager. I've kind of gotten a sense for their personalities. Maybe you throw something in, like one seems very numbers driven and metrics focused. The other one seems, very focused on team dynamic and culture. What is your feel for working with both of these people, or with the direct sales manager? Because that's who I would potentially be reporting to. So can you give me an idea of what it's like to report to them, and, the good, the bad, anything you're willing to share? And you will get very honest feedback. Like I've had ones, they're like, he's super micromanaging. I'm just letting you know right now, so you're aware of that walking into this role. But that's to help you so you can steer clear. If there's something that you're not going to be cool with, or something that's like a hard no for you, then you can avoid that.
Yeah, or you can like sense if they're hesitating, and like how transparent the culture really is and stuff like that.
Yeah. And questions about like collaboration between like you can get it's different for AM teams. I think are naturally more collaborative. Like AE teams, it's either like we are, or we're like at each other's throat. And I feel like there's no in between for that. So, so for an AM team, I think that would be an interesting question, is like not just collaboration between AMs with one another. Like, I think that's a fair question to ask, but then also like if they have like a CS team, like how, like, can you talk me through what the relationship between us and CS would look like? How to like account issue, like if you had someone reach out and they needed a password reset, do we typically field those, or with client success? Like start to ask questions about that, and how AMs work with the AEs on the team. Like, what is kind of the dynamic between the two groups? And they'll probably be like, the AEs are horrible. And then you'll hear whatever there. But that's good information. Yeah, I mean, like classic. So so that's good information to get to, just to give you an idea. But I think like all of that is good stuff but the one caution I would say with reps is don't get like too cozy with them either, because I think that's really easy to do too. And I've made this mistake before, where I think like we're cool, like they like me, like we're chill, we're on the same level. And then later on, like they all realize like they were part of the reason I didn't move forward or something too. So just remember, like they are interviewing you and they are at a peer level, but they're probably not the decision maker, but they still have like a say in this. So just try not to get like too cozy with them, and, just like be wary of that too.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, like, yeah, like complimenting them. And because again, like, they are going to be competitive probably. So they don't want to feel like you're going to like take their job, or like make them look bad. Right. Or like, there's a little bit of that. So, if I were a rep, like it's like, okay, are you going to make me better? Are you someone that like I would, really want on my team, that I can trust? So you want to try and get that across.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because there was one company I interviewed with, and it was basically an all-male sales team. And there was a female account executive, which I'm sure they paired with me because I was, female and interviewing. And she basically told me, she's like, I'm the only girl on the team. Like, it's always been that way. And I could have walked out right then. And I knew I was not getting that job. Like, no matter what I said in that moment, I was like, this wasn't going to go well, probably from the get-go. But I think it just, like, being mindful of like who you're interviewing with, it is like, you're going to be competing with these people. So it's such an interesting dynamic, because it always like interests me when people have like AEs involved with AE interviews, because I'm like, do they really want, like, if I am good, like, do they really want me on their team then? So it's just such an interesting, so I try to focus more on like, oh, like, I'm like, for instance, video. Like, I brought this up to one of the reps I was talking to. I was like, hey, I'm like playing around with video prospecting right now. So what I'm really looking for is like a culture where like we as AEs can like share some tips and tricks back and forth. And maybe like we could practice a few videos on each other, or like send a couple to prospects and then give each other feedback, you know, but like try to show that you're collaborative. I think that's like the one way around it. But yeah, that's like a very fair call out. Like, you will be competing with this person head to head probably, especially if you're both good. So it's just such an interesting, so I try to think more of like collaboration and like and like for me, it's really easy to kind of tone down some of those conversations, because I can be like, oh, I teach classes on the side, so I'm constantly like researching new prospecting techniques. So I'll probably nerd out on stuff and send you some LinkedIn articles. But you know, if you like that kind of thing, and they're like, oh yeah, like I never look into new strategies and stuff like that. I just wait till like our manager drops them down to me. So that would be cool to have someone that's at the forefront of that, that's on my team. So it's just like kind of then in their head thinking, oh, I can work with this person and potentially become even better because of the resources they're going to share with me. So you're kind of, it's like a quid pro quo. So yeah,
it's almost like you're like an athlete, like joining a team, right? You have to figure out like, are we going to be able to make each other better and like share the ball, right? Not that I'm coming in to like outshine you, right? So it's like, you know, I teach these things, like no big deal, you know.
Yeah, and it's easier for like AM teams, I think, to create like a little less of that environment. Like for AEs, it's like all of our teeth are like really sharp, and we're like constantly thinking about like who we're going to beat out. So I do think for your situation, like it would be easier to create some rapport with those folks. But you could easily like maybe go through LinkedIn and have like a couple names ready, like Morgan Ingram or whoever, and just be like, hey, here's some like new techniques I'm playing with, and like I follow these couple people. So like just have stuff like that at the ready where you could quickly say, or like these Thursday night sales. I don't know if you've done any of those, but like I actually go to these like Thursday night sales events, and it's basically like a couple hundred salespeople on a call. It could range from like BDRs, AEs, up to AMs, even some marketing folks are on there, but we are like constantly changing ideas and like talking about new things that we're working on and like what we're struggling with. And so that's like a cool way. And I'm hoping to bring those learnings back to my team too.
Great. And I've actually seen in some of the interviews I've had recently, people have started asking more about, right, do you read sales books? Are there any sales leaders that you follow? And I'm slowly having to like remember who I follow, because I just follow them and I read their stuff when it comes up. But you put me on the spot and say, so who are you following on LinkedIn? I'm like, me.
Yeah. And they're doing
ready.
it on purpose because they want to see if you're open to new ideas. Like it just goes right back around to that. Like they want to see that you're actually still like trying to get better. Like, because what's happening right now is we had this whole generation of like closers only people, and like they only took like hot leads and took like that's changed too. So now companies are looking for, regardless if it's an AE or AM, they want people that have hunting skills, that can get creative with outreach, that can cut through the noise. Because regardless if it's like, if you're working a Fortune 100 company, just because you have them as a client for a couple $1,000s in one division doesn't mean it's like a layup to get into anywhere else at the company. So they're really looking for people that are at the forefront of that. And that's where those questions are coming from, is like, is Paul willing to put in the work to keep learning new techniques, or is he done learning? Like, is he just an AM that has had X number of years of experience and he's all set? So they're like they're like creatively finding ways to find out that information. But again, that's where on like, maybe you have a separate cheat sheet that's like sales, whatever, voices on LinkedIn, then sales authors for books, and then maybe even like a couple events that are on your radar that are coming up, and just have that kind of like off to the side if you need it. But that would be a good resource for you too, just so you don't, because even though a sales book one, like I get stuck on and I've read a million, but like in the moment, I'm like, I can't think of like a name of a sales book. And then I sound like an idiot. But then in reality, I actually do know a bunch of sales books. And some of these authors, like, you know, I actually correspond with frequently on LinkedIn. So it's like crazy to me when I have trouble with that question, but it's because you're like stressed and it's too much in the moment. So anything like that, I would just have like something written out where if you get stuck and you can't think of something top of mind, at least it's like nearby where you could just be like, oh yeah, like John Barrows and Morgan Ingram are two that I really like following on LinkedIn. Like Morgan's actually part of John's team and like they're this dynamic duo, you know, all the, you know, you could just rattle off some stuff.
Yeah. And that's something like that level of preparedness, just if you write down those names a couple times, I'm sure they start sticking in your mind, because I had the same issue when I first started interviewing, like way back, about they ask you, how did you perform? How have you performed historically? What was your average deal size? What was your average sales cycle? And it's very easy to just forget all of that stuff in the moment. It's like, how was your performance? I'm like, well, I was over 100%. I don't remember exactly how many. So I started like writing out bullet points of, all right, these are some of the successes. These are some of the typical questions I get asked about the sales cycle, about, and specifically stories about good sales. Everyone wants to hear that. So like, I started memorizing certain clients and certain histories. And it took me a while to like go back and remember, all right, how did this deal end up coming to fruition? What were how many months did it take? All that kind of stuff. So
you need to put that in your about me section. That's like perfect. Like whatever you wrote down, just like copy paste it into bullets in that section, because that's like money just to, and even that information about like, I didn't even think about that, but like that would be a great piece of information. Like average contract value historically has been XYZ. Typical sales cycle that I'm accustomed to is 10 to 12 months, whatever it is, but like have some of that. Because as a recruiter, like that would be a layup. Like I could just like look there quickly and be like, cool, like he's used to enterprise or he's used to this. But that would be super easy, because they are like trying to peek at these LinkedIn, and when they have to dig through all this stuff. But I would obviously like lead with 100x% to quota. Like that would be like the top of that section. If it was me putting that together. But yeah, I'm the same way. Like it was really hard for me to rattle off. Like one company made me go backwards through my whole resume. And like, even though I was like top performer at a bunch of places, I was like, I don't remember what percent to quota I was in like 2013, like off the top of my head. So that's where like, because we are remote, even though I don't like love having too much to look at during interviews, I do keep my either my LinkedIn or my resume pulled up in the background behind my Zoom, just in case I need to click over to it. And then I have it like right behind the camera. So that way it still looks like I'm looking at them, but then I can like read off from there and be like, yeah, so, you know, in 2013, I was like 100% to whatever, but it's a lot easier to just have that as a reference point. But yeah, I had trouble with that too, 100%.
This is amazing. I'm sure we can talk forever. I have one last question because it's interesting. You know, we've been doing this for a few months now, and we are seeing a difference between, you know, people that are like very experienced in enterprise sales. They sort of get it right away. Account management to marketing, it's a little bit different, right? Like you're not naturally doing these things. So like, Alexine, like if you were talking to a marketer that was going to be jumping into their job hunt and like, you know, applying these best practices, not necessarily top of mind for them, like where would someone like that get started? Like, why would they do this? Like, how would you sell a marketer on applying some of these sales best practices?
I don't know that it is that different. Like marketers also have KPIs that they have to hit, and they're different than ours. But I had at Yellow, when I worked there, I had KPIs tied to the marketing team. So I had like a quota tied to net new revenue, a quota tied to existing revenue, tied to marketing, and then one tied to the SDR team. I had like 4 simultaneously, and it was intense. But that was like, there were KPIs that I could easily tie back to the marketing team. So I think for them, like you could easily lead with like, these are the typical clients that I've, worked on. These are some of the, I don't know all of their KPIs off the top of my head, but like, here's some of the conversion rates we've seen from different like you could use specific campaigns, for instance, that have been successful. And I would just take some of those metrics and like make that into success metrics. Because I do think like, even though it's not sales and you don't have the same type of metrics, even my friends that are in engineering, like they have certain milestones that they have to hit. So like one of my good friends is an engineer, and like she has specific like amounts of time, like duration of time to do releases, or a duration of time that it takes to fix bugs on average. Like there are metrics there too. So I feel like with any job, regardless what it is, like I think it's all about doing like a studious session of like breaking down like what are some of the things I've done. And some of that is like a good lesson in making sure you're tracking everything at all of these companies and making sure you know some of these ratios off the top of your head and some of these performance metrics. So like I've learned that the hard way a couple of times too, where I'm like, man, I wish I would have written that down. That would have been a great metric to have now. So I think that, but then all of the outreach stuff, like that's not exclusive to sales. Like regardless if you're like, I have friends that are in product management and engineering, and like they're asking me to make intros for them for other companies. Like it doesn't matter that I'm in sales. So I feel like some of the other strategies we talked about, having like an interview prep sheet, having using video like that for like marketing is changing too, where it's getting into more of this space where you have to be on more social. Like you look at companies like Gong, and they are just like charging through this new world of marketing right now. So I do feel like some of these strategies would work really well for marketing folks as well. But yeah, I think it's just getting honest about like what some of these metrics you've had in the past look like, and then how can I jot these down and have them available for these types of interviews.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, Paul, if you don't have any other burning questions, good luck. I will send this video out, obviously, to both of you, and we'll share it. And this will help a lot of people. Thank you so much, Alexine, for jumping in. I know you're doing a million things, but this was really awesome. And Paul, good luck later today.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, connect with me on LinkedIn and keep me posted. I want to hear how these interviews are going. And if there's any questions you get stuck on, or you like really feel like threw you for a loop, like shoot those my way. I always love questions like that, because then I don't mess them up the second time around, but they hurt in the moment. So let me know if you hit any of those, or if you're like feeling confused on anything, or if I can help at all, because I'm happy to.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to especially look into my About Me, which I have to say, I did, there was one of these videos that I watched about a month ago, about adjusting your LinkedIn profile. So I like all the About Me, the header, all these things are new based on watching one of these videos. And it wasn't until I made those changes that I started hearing from recruiters again.
Good.
So,
yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. And copy some of like those like how my, if you look at my job history, like the thing that's worked really well is just like start like 100% to quote, like just start with the percentage right at the beginning, or whatever the award is, and then like trail off into whatever other text you want to add, but like kind of line it up that way. So it's really easy for them to see like 100%, like 120%, like award, this, that, and the other. But take a look and let me know if you want me to peek at your LinkedIn once you like tweak anything, and I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to take you up on that.
Cool.
Love it. Awesome, great. Guys. Well, thank you so much, guys. Have such a great day.
Thanks. All right. Talk to you both soon. Bye.